All right. So why don't we just get started? While we're while this is all happening, I get started. But thank you all for joining us tonight. Hey, I happen to have that on the right tab. I was like, oh shit, did I actually do that? Anyway, here we go. So we're talking about how our healthcare industry relates to the global drug trade, legal drug trade. Tainted drugs, ex-FDA inspector warns of dangers in U.S. medicines made in China and India. Mahat, I read this before. I read this before, but I didn't try to pronounce it. Masad Mohamed, okay, says that the FBI struggles to police the sprawling number of overseas drugs manufacturers who may hide problems in their product production lines. Can you guys read this? Good. The notice arrived at the home of Denise Schreck, a New Jersey woman who suffers from high blood pressure last July. Urgent product recall blared the words at the top of the letter from her pharmacy. The blood pressure medication used by Schreck and millions of other Americans was tainted. The culprit, a chemical with the potential to cause cancer. Schreck went online to learn more and discovered that the generic drug valsartan was in fact found to contain a contaminant formerly used in the production of rocket fuel, according to a government fact sheet. I was just really blown away, Shrek 51 to NBC News. It's shocking to know that you've been taking a probable carcinogen for 4 years. Ugh. Yeah. Fucking rocket fuel. I mean, it's a contaminant formerly used in rocket fuel. So the production rocket fuel. It's not actually rocket fuel. It's a chemical that happens to be used in rocket fuel. So yeah, there's a difference there. And this is Denise Schreck, the woman who was affected. Yeah. The valsartan call came as little surprise to Masad Mohamed. I'm butchering that. A former inspector with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA). More than a year before notices went out, Mohamed had tried to sound the alarm on what he flagged as potential systemic problems at 2 facilities in China and India that produce the active ingredients in generic valsartan and other blood pressure medications. Speaking out publicly for the first time, Mohamed told NBC News that the FDA ultimately overruled his recommendations to crack down on one of the plants. Perhaps more alarming, he says, the issues at the 2 overseas drug production facilities are hardly unique. This is only the tip of the iceberg, Mohamed said in an exclusive interview. Valsartan case underscores the Valsartan case underscores a new reality in the pharmaceutical industry, a growing reliance on foreign manufacturers to provide the raw ingredients of drugs sold in the U.S., according to FDA data. Roughly 85% of facilities manufacturing the ingredients in American drugs are located overseas, mainly from China and India, where production costs are low and experts say local government oversight is less stringent. All of a sudden I can read again. The shift was contributed to a flood of recent calls and fueled escalating concerns about the safety of medicines consumed in the U.S. Since last summer, drug companies have announced a total of 45 recalls of generic life-saving blood pressure medications. They have certain versions of valsartan and other blood pressure drugs, losartan, and irbesartan, whatever, man, as well as other blood pressure medications that contain the recalled drugs in their formulations. The raw ingredients were all traced to overseas manufacturing sites where drugs can be processed at a lower cost than the U.S. facilities. Growing up, we had this saying, "You get what you pay for," Mohamed said. And we have the belief for everything except pharmaceuticals. If we want to drive competition, drive the price down, it comes at the cost of quality. Do you want to drive competition? Is it the part of, I mean, I guess part of it's a part of a competition. The other part is like regulations, though, right? And okay, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We'll talk about that later. And that's Mohamed here. For Mohamed, the recalls are only part of the story. He says a more systemic issue has largely gone unreported. FDA inspectors struggling to keep up with foreign drug manufacturers that may bury or hide problems in their production. This is the real big issue. Yeah, that's the real problem. So we don't know how bad it is. Last year, the FDA inspected only 1 in 5 registered human drug manufacturing facilities abroad, according to agency data. With the U.S. inspectors scrambling to review a sprawling network of overseas drug production plants, the FDA is often left to rely on the word of the facility managers, Mohamed said. I believe it would surprise Americans how much we rely on the manufacturer and whatever they tell us to say that a drug is good or bad, the former inspector told NBC News. Guys, focus on this part. Focus on this part. It's self-report. Guys and gals, this is self-report. Your drugs, the FDA inspects 1 out of 5. That means 80%. 80% don't get inspected. I guess maybe within a year. I'm assuming they just rotate the ones that they actually bother to get to. I'm assuming, right? But 80% aren't, and then they just call them up. Hey, are you poisoning us? Nah, we're cool. Yeah, it's all good. All right. Sure. That's our process. That's what you're putting in your mouth. The FDA has also inspected only about 1 in 5 domestic drug manufacturing facilities last year, okay, according to agency data. But unlike inspections at U.S. plants where investigators can show up without warning and ask for more time to examine conditions if they identify potential issues, Mohamed said the foreign site reviews are often hobbled by language barriers and time constraints. Even better, say I'm a domestic facility and I tell my supervisors that I'm finding all these problems and I need more time to inspect. That happens. No issue, Mohamed said. The same is not true of a foreign facility. I've had inspections where I really could have benefited from the extra time. I knew there were problems to be uncovered, but I had to leave the country. Okay. Mohamed spent 3 years as FDA inspector, working mainly overseas to inspect foreign manufacturing facilities. A Texas native with a PhD in biochemistry, Mohamed, 34, joined the agency driven by a desire to contribute to the field of public health. Hey, actually, I forget when this was. When was this published? This article was published in 2019, so before our the pandemic here. He had been in the role for more than 2 years when he went to inspect the Zhaojiang, Hawaii, a pharmaceutical plant in Linhai, China. The company that produced the tainted ingredients in Shrek's recalled medication in May 2017. Mohamed's 4-day inspection turned up a series of alarming issues that he later outlined in official reports. Facilities and equipment not maintained, anomalies in testing not investigated, and unknown impurities dismissed as laboratory error. So apparently they did test the drugs, right? And they said, like, you know, they ran them through a lab and it's like, oh, those are just lab errors. Nothing to see here. Okay. Great. After his visit, and as first reported by Bloomberg, Mohamed recommended that a warning letter be sent to the firm, an official action that bars the company from gaining the approvals to produce new U.S. drugs at the facility until it resolves the issues. But 3 months later, he was overruled by FDA management. The FDA decided to allow Zhaojiang, whatever, to voluntarily fix the problems on its own. The agency wrote in an official document obtained by NBC News, citing the firm's compliance history and mostly adequate responses to impurities in their testing. There are many factors that inform the FDA's decisions at a given time regarding what action to take following an inspection, the FDA said in a statement to NBC News. We make those decisions in the interest of patient safety based on all the information available to us, including evidence collected during an FDA inspection and a manufacturer's proposed corrective actions. So they asked the manufacturer, hey, you gonna fix this? Yeah, we're gonna fix this. All right, I guess that's good enough. I mean, because look, they had an inspector, they did an inspection, they said, hey, here's all these problems, this is fucking terrible. Then I guess they talked to the manufacturer, like, nah, I guess he's cool. After facing criticism over its handling of the case, the FDA said it would have been unlikely to catch the impurities at the source of the recall during a routine inspection. But they did. But I'm very confused. But they did. Or maybe this is a different drug, right? Because this guy, Mohamed, went there in 2017. So it's possible that it's a different drug that's being produced then. That, you know, spawned this article 2 years later. So maybe that's what I mean. But like, there was a report about this facility, and they apparently ignored it. Nonetheless, our inspections did reveal systemic problems of supervision that could have created the conditions for quality issues to arise, reads a January 2019 FDA press release. Okay, so they say our inspections revealed problems, but at the same time they said it would have been unlikely to catch the impurities at the source. So there were problems, but you didn't actually address them. But you were told about, you didn't actually address them, but you're saying, well, but it would have been impossible for us to do anything any which way, right? There's a lot of CYA going on here. In a statement to NBC News, Shi Zhang said it's working closely with regulators here and abroad to evaluate the source of the impurities that resulted in the recall, and is determining if any modifications to its manufacturing process are necessary. I would say so. I would say so that the contaminant, you know, that's used to make rocket fuel, I think that might be I think that could be an issue. Maybe you should change something. Well, I don't know. I guess those are the pills, the recalled pills. Yeah, right there. The problems were not confined to the facility in China. While investigating a drug production factory in India, Hetero Labs Limited in December 2016, Mohamed discovered what appeared to be a brazen attempt to cover up issues at the plant. I was going to the bathroom, and I kept seeing that people were going into an archival room, and that's not generally typical, Mohamed said. He decided to review the firm's closed-circuit TV footage. What the inspector saw next shocked him. Mohamed watched footage of individuals shredding company documents 4 days before his arrival, the inspection report says. I mean, I'm laughing because it's so terrifying that, like, what else would we do? This place produces drugs that go in your body. They were staying up all night, shredding extensive amounts of documents right before our audit. It means there are systemic issues. Yeah, I would say so. It's one of the more concerning findings I've had over the years, the former inspector said. The FDA eventually sent a warning letter to Hetero in August 2017, citing significant violations of current good manufacturing practice. Some 19 months after Mohamed first flagged suspicious activity at the plant, Hetero was found to be one of the sources of the contaminated drug ingredients for sale in the U.S. What a surprise! Hetero did not respond to several requests by NBC News. In the case of Valsartan products, the FDA said last August that more than half of all medication sold in the U.S. was being pulled from store shelves. While it's unknown exactly how many people have been impacted by the recalls, the sheer demand for the drug suggests it could reach into the millions. In 2016, 1.6 million people purchased Valsartan and 9.2 million bought Losartan, according to data provided by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The recall creates a vexing challenge for consumers like Don Gribb, who said he struggled to find a suitable alternative after finding out that his Valsartan medication was being pulled from store shelves. Almost from prescription to prescription, I could find significant changes in my blood pressure, said Gribb, 68, of Michigan. And that's actually really important, right? It's like, okay, we pull this, but like these people still need medication. Like they were taking the medication for a reason. And there may not be another product on the market that fits them. Or that they don't react to or whatever, right? There are some medications that are extremely specialized, right? For like extremely niche cases, right? And some people, they literally just cannot tolerate anything else, right? There is no replacement. So if that thing is recalled, they are fucked. They are fucked. They are fucked just as bad as if the drug itself had actually killed them. I mean, they're fucked, right? So this is an issue. The FDA and outside healthcare professionals have warned consumers against suddenly stopping the medication due to the recall, saying that the short-term risk outweigh the potential impact of consuming the recalled medication. You hear that? Hey, you can't get off the medication suddenly, because that would be dangerous. More dangerous than the tainted medication will hurt you. So keep taking the tainted medication, wean yourself off of that, and hope for the best. That's the answer. The uncertainty surrounding the medications also pose challenges to doctors. It's hard to know what to prescribe, patients said. Dr. Randall Zusman, a cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, Heart Center in Boston. You want to assume it's safe and effective. You don't want to feel like you're prescribing something that causes harm. Not your fault. The FDA says the overall risk posed by the impurities is small. For valsartan, FDA testing found the pills contain somewhere between 300 and 200 times the agency's acceptable level for NDMA, the probable carcinogen in the center of the recall. If 8,000 people took the highest dose of the contaminated drug daily for 4 years, the FDA estimates there may be one additional case of cancer over the lifetimes of those people. This is troubling to us, and we know it's troubling to the public, the FDA said in a statement. The concern is appropriate. So they're saying the risk is small, so it's fair enough to say the risk is small, and going from there, it could be the one, right? And there's also more serious impurities that can happen, right? Like really serious shit. Experts said the contaminants are still powerful at low levels. This is well beyond the risk that government agencies typically deem acceptable, said Lisa Lefferts, a senior scientist at the Center of Science in the Public Interest. While most people won't get cancer from the contaminants in these pills, it's an unacceptable risk and avoidable. The FDA had issued a list of medications free of probable carcinogens and says it has been working to mitigate and prevent shortages. Yeah, this is the thing about it being avoidable. Yeah, it's avoidable. You know, because like they said there, where was it? That and so it has 300 to 200 times 210 times the agency's acceptable level of NDMA, right? Like you can't get rid of all these impurities, right? Like it's just really difficult to manufacture things. Like there's like blood levels that they allow. What's that other drug I'm thinking of? It's not a drug, it's an element. But there's just regular impurities that show up in manufacturing things from all kinds of sources, and it's not expected you get rid of all of it, but most of it, yeah, right? If you follow proper regulations, you can get rid of most of that stuff. So like, yeah, you've probably taken medicines with some sort of a level of impurity, but it's just so tiny that like it's nothing worth worrying about. But this is above the limit. This is way above the limit. Experts said the contaminants are still powerful at low levels. This is well beyond the oh, sorry, I read that. Our first action was to immediately undertake a major operation to investigate and to identify the root causes of the presence of these impurities and to work with companies to address the risk that the impurities pose to patients, Dr. Janet Woodcock, the FDA director for the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research, said in a statement to NBC News. Dozens of consumers have now gathered to sue nearly every company involved in the recall through a consolidated multi-district litigation case in New Jersey. There are a lot of things that could have been done to prevent something like this. Daniel Nye, an attorney for the plaintiffs, told NBC News. An association for accessible medicines, the trade group for generic drug manufacturers, said its member companies with affected products voluntarily recalled their medicines containing valsartan and have worked closely with the FDA. Patients in the United States can be confident that the medicines they take are safe and effective. The group added, manufacturers of generic medicines and the Food and Drug Administration work to ensure the prescription drugs meet the same high quality standards regardless of where they're manufactured. Okay, whatever. That's a nice statement. But clearly, clearly, you're not doing that. Mohamed left the FDA in 2017, disillusioned over his experience trying to police a sprawling industry and what he describes as a cat and a mouse game, where companies do what they can to conceal problems from the FDA. He believes, well, they'll do that for any regulators, to be fair, right? They don't want to follow regulations because it's more expensive. He believes the agency needs to hire more qualified investigators and needs to conduct more inspections of overseas facilities producing drug ingredients. Now working for private pharmaceutical sector in India, Mohamed said you're like you're working for the bad guys now. Whatever. Mohamed said he's speaking out to raise awareness about the risk of tainted drugs. I think there's a significant portion of which, if we test it here in the U.S., would not pass. As for Shrek, the anxiety brought up on by the valsartan recall has prompted her to stash her bottle of pills in a small brown cabinet above her kitchen sink. Why? She sees it as evidence that could be used in court of law, and the event the cancer were to infect her body one day. I hate to think that because of this I run the extra risk of developing cancer, Shrek said, but it is my proof. Wow. Okay, yep. Yeah. Tainted love. Here we go. So, what do you all think? Her name is Shrek. Her name is Shrek. Big McNuggets. Her name is Shrek. But yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's the type of behavior from a sitcom. Yeah. So you guys are seeing this. That's what a wild story. Like what a wild story that they just showed. So I've heard of other ones that are even like fucking worse. And good luck suing. Yeah, good luck suing in terms of like the cancer, right? It's so hard suing over cancer because it's like, well, it could have been caused by another source. You'd have to have like really multiple people taking the same drug or being exposed to the same chemical or something. For that to work, right? Like, or unless you get something like completely exotic, right? Something like, for instance, there is that a weed killer Roundup, which is made by Monsanto, which is a truly evil company. If I'm remembering this correctly, now I believe this is, yeah. Actually, I am remembering this correctly. So there was like the thing says, oh, it's safe to spray with, right? Okay. Well, this guy was spraying without protection, without any sort of protection with his weed killer Roundup for a long time and exposed himself to it. And I think some of it spilled on him. I forget. But he immediately got like this terrible like skin infection, and I think it was also some sort of cancer. Like his health took a serious downturn after that. So it was like it was an easier thing to like link, especially if it happens shortly afterwards. There was this other story I heard about a person going to who worked at like a chemical manufacturing plant, and like a tank leaked and he got hit with some sort of chemical, and like immediately like their skin just like didn't quite melt, but like whatever like, I guess, like pustules like sprouted all over their bodies. Like, it was gruesome what happened to this person, just like immediately. So when those cases happen, right, then yeah, it's pretty easy to figure out what the problem was. Though I guess I can try to give more details because I don't remember the story well enough. But yeah, it's all I do is make your case at that point. But for all these cancers, right, you can say, yeah, you can say, yeah, I took these drugs and they had these impurities, and then years later I got a cancer. It's gonna be tough to prove in court. It's gonna be real tough. Toxic Avenger, that's a movie, right? And like when that happened, like basically someone gets exposed to toxic chemicals and then they like get superpowers or something. That what happens? Arsenic, I think, is the one I was thinking of. Arsenic, yeah, there's a certain level of arsenic that you can that are just in the environment, right? And you just, okay, you just take it and you'll use, unless you eat like a shitload of apples, you won't build up enough arsenic in you for it to be a problem. But yeah, there's like a certain level of arsenic that they're just allowed to be in our products. Toxic Adventures, real superpowers spawning horrible sequels. Okay. All right, everyone. So if you guys want to talk about this, then yeah, what I guess what I want to discuss is, one, can we trust the pharmaceutical industry in general? And two, can we trust foreign-made products? Do you think this is a globalism gone wrong? I think that it'd be better for all if everything was manufactured in the States. Yeah. So, was it cyanide in apples? Okay. Well, that sounds wonderful. Any which way, right? Let's make sure we open in chat. Let's this is open walk on panel. On terms like you just seeing a homemade participate. Join Discord server and go into the robot waiting room so you can be let in the Discord link for your convenience. We'll have to have you. We'll have to have you. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So let's talk about this thing. And what your feelings are. Oh, apparently there's a lot of people. Hey, can we get a can we get a mod? Can we get a mod in the waiting room? SEAL team, Raz, can we get a mod in the waiting room? Can we get a mod in the waiting room? Okay, thanks, SEAL team, Raz. Yeah, thank you so much. Again, like, shout out to SEAL Team Raz, who's just like awesome, incredible, like one of our greatest mods, right? And Paul, they just really crush it, man. Shout out to them. Constantly over here, constantly trying to help out. Should get a COVID vax. Okay, yeah, we'll wait for SEAL Team Raz. We'll work it out, and we'll get some people in to discuss this. Have a good time. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this content, support the channel, subs to the channel, give bits or give subs. We have a Amazon Prime Prime or /Prime Gaming. Use that here. If you got one free sub, use it here. But also, yeah, support this channel. If you're liking this, help out, support us and all the things that we do here for you, right? So if you like having the space here 6 nights a week, well then, yeah, help out the community, help out the channel. Yeah. Help out. So subs to the channel, gift bits, or gift subs. All that helps. It's the start of the month, and the leaderboard is empty, so plenty of time to rise to the top, to take that glory for yourself. So yeah, help out the channel, assist, subs to the channel, or gift bits, or gift subs. It really does help us out. We can't do it without your assistance out there. So yeah, if you got like a gift sub, consider continuing your gift sub. If you appreciate all the things we get up to, yeah, help us out. Hopefully people are coming in. What's going on here? So hopefully I don't know what's going on. Oh hey, Dr. K. Hello, hi.
That's right. The vanguard is in. The front runner. She's here.
Hello.
First on the.
Yeah. Nice to have you. Oh, redheaded man. Hey.
How's it going?
Hey. Nice to have you here. Oh, and Dre's here. Do we have cameras?
Yeah, cameraman.
Yeah, I just had to pop on mine.
Blurry. I'm here with the blurry.
Okay.
So I wasn't in a super rush to put it on. But...
okay.
Get out of here for a second.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you for being here, Dr. K. Nice to have you around. And thanks.
Anytime.
Thank you. And also, our friend, redheaded man. We haven't seen you in a little bit. Hey, how are you?
Yeah. I blame Elden Ring. I've really kind of been grinding it out. So
yeah, I've been grinding. I was doing the Tree Sentinel. I've been working on the Tree Sentinel. I'm gonna get him. Like yeah,
I got hung up on the. I beat my bosses out of order, and I went with a mage character. So now like I get nuked by the second kind of like main boss. Not to spoil anything. So rather kind of pissy.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Dre, for being here, and KO Dave. Cameras, please, help us out.
You don't want to see me.
Come on, Kate. Dave. Cameras on. Hooray.
You wouldn't like me when I'm ugly.
Okay. Okay. All right. So. You're being super weird, but okay, whatever. All right.
I'm just a little tired, that's all.
Okay, yeah. Well, we were.
Join, go to bed, then.
I'm sorry?
It's not advice for Dave. It's all good.
Okay, yeah. So we were talking about tainted drugs from foreign countries. So yeah, what are your initial thoughts? Hey, Chinchilla. Hey, Chinchilla on chat.
I just want to kind of start out just by laying it out there because I worry there may be a very small tinge of xenophobia when we have these conversations.
Okay.
As far as like drugs being made in other countries. So I want to make sure that we're all kind of clear. We're not taking these drugs away from these countries because they're all Asian and Asians can't fucking properly make drugs, right? There's a lot of different reasons why we would want these drugs here in America, from jobs and regulation. So I just want to clarify that from the start.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Goddamn Chinese.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh boy.
So yeah, what are your thoughts?
I mean, you know me, I'm a socialist. I am one of two things either has to occur, right? There has to be either sort of international solidarity and cooperation when it comes to really any globalism and international trade expenditure. Or generally, I do advocate for when it comes to necessary domestic products, things like food, water, and obviously drugs. I generally will advocate for import replacement, where you try to make sure the necessities for a functioning like population to be manufactured as domestically as possible and as close to the point of consumption as reasonable.
Anyone else?
This is.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were done. Yeah.
I mean, I'll rant as long as you'll let me. This is good for environmental purposes because, you know, as closer something is at the point of creation to consumption, the less, you know, transport costs we're talking about, less CO2 in our air, and the better for the environment overall it's going to be. in addition, when you are talking about more localized supply chains, you're talking about adding a level of flexibility to supply chains that international shipping, as evidenced with the enormous port backlogs that I'm facing in my own hometown right now, shows that the international supply chains we have right now are extremely rigid and pre-planned months in advance, and that sudden changes to those plans essentially can knock a large supply chain right on its ass if unprepared.
Indeed.
So that's why I like import replacement.
Okay. Anyone else?
Greater consumer trust too.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that doesn't
I
get that huge of
Does anyone
xenophobia.
else have thoughts on the topic, guys?
I don't know, because I don't think we're necessarily in disagreement as far as the idea of like having drugs if they are able to be produced here. Now, a lot of these are very complex mixes, and the margin of error is very small, kind of like how you were going over in the article, talking about some contaminants are always going to be in there, but you want to eliminate as much as you can, right? I don't know if we're going to have a lot of disagreement here until it starts coming at cost, as like cost to the customer. That's going to be a very big deal.
So
a lot of this is going to.
So I guess my position is that I think that I'm a protectionist, and I'm all about protecting jobs here in the States.
Sure.
That I think that globalism has failed. Has failed to produce results for workers. I think it has produced results for consumers for like cheaper goods, but those goods come at an expensive price, which would be, possibly being contaminated, right?
Or lost jobs.
Yeah, there was.
Here.
I may be able to give you a line of contention on that one then, if you want to kind of look at it like that. Because what I would say was the responsibility of the government, and I think we rely on the free market too much on this one. The responsibility of the government is to like prepare its citizens to the future. And when we were doing some of these trade deals that may have become problematic as far as emptying out and losing a lot of jobs that go overseas, was we weren't figuring out a way, and we didn't have a good way to prepare and educate our citizens for the future. So whoever was going to go into the market, right?
Yeah.
So when back in the early 90s, mid 80s, when Detroit and the automotive industry started really kind of taking a tank on that and really kind of sinking, it seemed like we didn't have a good backup plan for those issues. And now, along with a bunch of different other industries, we're kind of looking around and we're like, oh shit, just like every other nation is.
Yeah,
as far as like,
deindustrialization.
right. As far as like the pandemic and hitting going, and we're starting to realize we need these places here. It's going to take a major investment to start building facilities that are going to be qualified to build these drugs safely. If we just want to stick specifically to pharmaceutical drugs, then yeah, it's going to take a lot of investment.
Yeah, so let's make the investment.
I mean, you're not going to get me to argue on that.
Yeah, go ahead,
100%.
Go ahead, Dre.
Yeah, Prime. I'm
Yeah. So one thing on like the this is kind of like optimistic and kind of naive, is to want more I guess cooperation with regulation with every market that we participate in, and every job market.
the NAFTA answer.
Huh?
Let him finish. Oh my God, don't interrupt him. He doesn't. Please finish.
Yeah. So like this might be naive and might be a little bit but whatever. I'm just gonna throw it out there that in the globalist sense, a world recognized regulatory system and a regulatory agency that would be able to regulate things at the same critical rate that we have in the States in our rigid regulatory systems would be able to create competition for jobs here. but the fact that we don't have the same regulatory systems is that yeah, so the same regulatory systems that don't exist in other markets, not just in China or not just in South America, but worldwide, would be able to incentivize more jobs here in America, because it would be more competitive, and the prices of things would, paying your labor force, the living wage, those things. If those things were regulated on the global scale as well, then you would see a lot more jobs return back here, because it wouldn't be just as convenient to send jobs other places.
Well, you can look at examples like NAFTA, as far as like what they tried to do, the Obama administration, what they tried to do, as far as like vehicles being Ford specifically making their vehicles in Mexico, completing them to a certain percentage, and then sending them to a different, shipping them off to a plant in the United States to get the Made in America sticker, right?
Yeah.
Most of that labor was done in Mexico, as far as like from starting from zero. What they tried to do, and I think they had a successful. That's always on a scale, but I think they did a successful job as far as like the negotiating power, and then kind of the next administration came in and like shit all over that. But
well, I think one pushback that you would have in the implementation of my strategy would be, and this is gonna be kind of funny, but you would have guys like conspiracy theorists and Alex Jones saying the world order, the world order. The world order is
trying to regulate. Anyways.
Well, yeah, and that's like the other. But on top of that, you're what you're going to get that kind of no matter what. But you're also going to get a little bit of pushback of having these plants in these countries that are necessarily kind of like second world economies, right? Is going to be a net benefit for them.
Yes.
And that problem. Well, would you disagree? You've been waiting a while. Go ahead, Doug.
Sort of. It depends if corporations, their entire job, right, when it comes to their fiduciary duty is to generate profit, right, by any means necessary to sort of pay back their shareholders and things like that. So they're always they have entire teams, right, dedicated to figuring out what action maximizes the most profit, right?
Yeah.
And so, when a lot of jobs were getting shipped over to China, that's because China was a place where it was pretty easy to export, labor was cheap, and there was enough of an industrial base already that you could sort of just improve the existing stuff without having to do too much effort. Whereas, going to somewhere else like Kenya,
like Nicaragua, and like building from the ground
Venezuela, up. Places like that.
Yeah, and so actually now, Dear China is actually having this exact same issue that we face, where their wages have essentially risen due to a lot of internal policies by the Chinese state. And so because of this, it's no longer the cheapest place to be doing business. And so right now you're seeing a lot of firms that can ship out easily trying to ship out and move to other countries. The difference is that the response by the Chinese state and the response by the American state when this sort of deindustrialization occurred is very different. And one thing China has been doing that sort of insulates it from some of the worst effects of this is creating sort of its own national domestic brands based off of the companies that were already there. Now, this would never fly in the U.S. We absolutely, our governmental agencies absolutely despise nationalized industries, whether set up for their own purpose or nationalizing existing ones. But it is a way to avoid the worst of the effects of deindustrialization. Now, I push back on that, right? Specifically because, right, is if those jobs are sent to another country, right, are they paying, anywhere on par with U.S. wages? Are they paying, below that, which they obviously are going to be in order to, that's the whole reason they're generating more cost, because labor is one of the most expensive points in any supply chain. And so, the question then becomes, right, is are those wages enough to actually raise net living standards in those countries? And are the laborers in those positions being, given the due diligence, the protection of unions and the access to amenities aside from simply a wage that a job should provide, right? And,
Yeah, like healthcare and things like that. Retirement.
Exactly, and it's
Well, there
Well, it's
are other
very hit or
factors that need to
miss.
be considered too, though. I mean, we've been under the rate of natural unemployment for close to 2 years now. The natural rate of unemployment being around 5%. We've been hovering around like 3.5 to 4%. And a lot of local businesses have been able to unable to staff up to the level that allows them to even maintain normal hours in business flow. So we also have to look at whether or not the loss of those jobs, or the export of those jobs rather, is of net benefit to the economy, both domestically
Small
and
businesses
where they're being
generally
exported
aren't going
to.
to be a source of exportation of labor, though.
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't hear
Right.
what you said. Dr. K?
Yeah. Small business is generally not an area where you see exportation of labor transnationally. Usually that's only reserved for especially large firms. Or firms
Well,
of
that's
scale.
Or
not
manufacturing, like manufacturing jobs, or
So
industrial.
it's highly dependent on the business.
manufacturing and other jobs that need to outsource things like tech and logistical support and need to be able to provide it at a larger scale than they can currently staff for. And, personally, we, even as a very small company, the organization that I worked for employed outsourced accounting and logistics support, even when we were only a 15-person organization here in the state of Oregon. So there are extenuating circumstances that make it beneficial for some businesses to be able to grow and bolster their domestic workforce if they're able to outsource some of those ancillary positions in an early growth stage. So it's a multifaceted issue for sure.
Generally, you should try to stop businesses at a smaller scale from outsourcing abroad, as that is usually a net negative for a country. Like I generally think a nation state that has its own self-interest at stake will push back against that sort of impulse.
That is entirely possible, but I do think that there obviously needs to be some consideration for the businesses that don't have a great pool of labor to draw from, the businesses that spring up in rural and low population areas that don't have highly educated and readily available workforces.
The nation state should generally be putting a thumb on the scale then if it wants those businesses to propagate, right? You should be putting a thumb on a scale and helping them to propagate, but
absolutely
that is
agree with that.
a priority for our nation state.
We would agree that thumb on the scale would probably be best done not in forms of tariffs, but tax incentives, correct?
This is a carrot situation, not a stick situation.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
I wanted to make sure.
Although there are,
not punishing
I can agree with stipulations for stick behavior in keeping industry within a nation. That, let's say, workers have to be paid $25 an hour now, right? So Mr. Elon Musk says, all right, I'm taking all of my manufacturing for my fancy bullshit, right, to random country, Bolivia, right? Sure. And so he's taking it all to... Oh, wait, no, he has a history there, doesn't he? Anyways, so he's going to move it all to Bolivia. I'm completely okay with a nation state saying, if it is within national interest, to be like, no, actually, you cannot move your manufacturing out, and if you do, you need to divest. And preferably, the divestment needs to go first to any unionized organization.
When you say divest, can you elaborate that for me?
Sure. Like the factories that you already have set up here, you are not moving that equipment out of the country.
Okay.
It is because for some national interest reason, we are keeping that equipment here. You need to either sell it to a rival company that will stay within the U.S., to your own unions who want to stay in the U.S., or to a governmental nationalized corporation that does a similar job to what you're doing.
Do you
Right?
find
I
that
believe
possible in
this is
today's
I
legal
believe that the
system to
government
actually?
of Russia is implementing
Yes, this
the
is
very
very
same
radical
policy.
economic policy. Here,
Mhm.
I'm talking. This is very radical economic policy in 21st century America, but it's not that actually that radical of economic policy
Yeah.
for 20th century Europe, for many
Mhm.
parts of Europe even today. This is pretty basic economic policy in places like China and Cuba with, sort of command economies. And while I would be against an entirely state-planned economy, of course, there are situations where you can use the strength of a state to put the thumb on the scale in favor of your workers and your population who lives there, who are your constituents, who you're supposed to, at least in theory, be serving. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But yeah, and back to the point I was trying to make with we should like globalism hasn't worked because of greed, right? It hasn't worked in the sense that we wanted it to, because there's an incentive to always find a more exploitable labor force. There's
So
always been
when you say greed, I'm not sure, like when you say it hasn't worked, like what exactly hasn't worked? Like what is like the failure? So like in terms of workers, right? Like I think it was always going to be a failure. I mean, workers were against these things from the beginning, right? These outsourcing of jobs. For consumers, it's mostly been okay.
it's worked. No, it's worked really well for consumers. So let me
except for the tainted trucks. But go ahead, Trey.
No, but I mean on a grander scale, yeah. On the micro, there's going to be cases where the lack of regulation and the exchanging of multiple hands for these products are going to result in tainted products. But in the convenience and ease of access for
Let him finish. Let him finish, please, Trey.
Yeah, like please stop interrupting me. I'm talking. So the ease of access and the price stability or like lower pricing has been a benefit for consumers. That is fair. But like you said, the expensive cost of those trade-offs have been felt by the American people and the people of the nations being exploited. Now you can make the argument that you're creating jobs in places that wouldn't have those jobs created, which is a fair argument. Which is a fair argument because you're including other industries into the global market in the global economy. But the competition for profits will always outweigh the benefits for the workers. And so that's in that regard we failed on the human side of things, on the worker side, on the labor force side of things.
But that doesn't necessarily seem to track on to, I mean, like the universal nature of what you're suggesting doesn't entirely track onto reality, because there are businesses that go out of their way to implement worker-friendly policies against the bottom line, and whether you can argue whether or not those are like simple PR moves. I'm sorry.
They're outliers, far from the norm.
Yeah,
just let 'em go.
absolutely
Portland,
far
yeah.
from the norm. But like that's just to say that like the system lacking regulation and like the proper level of oversight to ensure those regulations are adhered to is the problem, not necessarily the system itself, because any system that has the tendency to consolidate power amongst a core group of individuals is going to have a tendency for abuse, and checks and balances need to be implemented and carefully adhered to curb that. Right now, I would argue that like the big problem with crony capitalism in the US isn't the like capitalist model at large, but like the way that we regulated and enforce those regulations.
Can you expand upon that? Because
No.
Hold on. Go ahead. Portland, you want to expand upon that?
Well, yeah, I think that I covered what I meant pretty completely in my initial statement, but I believe that any system, whether it's worker friendly or capital friendly, there are tendencies towards abuse and self-interest, and you can only mitigate and curb those by implementing checks and balances and making sure that the oversight of those checks and balances is carefully adhered to. So we have a low standard of oversight in this country. We have very, very minimal penalties for things like stock market behavioral abuse and insider trading and things of that nature, things that are very, very minimally enforced, and if they are enforced, they represent a very minimal slap on the wrist in comparison to the impact that they generate. That kind of culture can be created in any system that isn't like this, poorly enforced and doesn't have good checks and balances.
Okay, Dr. K.
Yes, any institution that's allowed to rot will, of course, do that. That said, capital, when left to its own devices, this is essentially the natural end goal of capital, when unregulated. So I push back against the term crony capitalism when this is just capitalism in its fairly natural state, as we've seen reproduced across countless nations in history. That said, I would say that yes, you need checks and balances, and that these checks and balances on a corporate interest rate should be one, an incredibly proactive union, and two, a incredibly proactive sector of labor protections within within any nation state, right? But moreover, right, is that puts a band-aid on the problem that you're facing there. But if you want to end the problem of sort of the maximalization of profits, you need to destroy the underlying incentive, right? And that is the undemocratic nature of the corporate firm as it exists now. Instead, you should be creating a democratic firm, right? That way, it has the fiduciary duty not to a small council of investors, but to the entirety of the firm itself, and ideally, even further ties to the communities that they would exist in, and so they have ties to investing into that community at large. It should be a partnership, not a paternalistic relationship, as companies tend to be in the communities they exist in right now.
So I would like to so my I don't really have pushback. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but in regards to the democratic approach to a firm, when like profits, the reason why profits are protected, or why they're so like they're such the driving force for a lot of political discussion and debate, is because you're not gonna have growth without profits. So you're not gonna be able to you're not gonna be able to create more jobs or be able to expand that company without profits.
Yeah, of course.
Because it requires capital to make capital. And so
Yeah.
in some sense, the reason why that capitalism is protected is because when these companies make the money and the profits that these corporate owners rake in, they invest it into creating a bigger company, into creating a more
Necessarily.
well, I mean, they don't just these companies don't just get massive out of nowhere, you know, like
But point of order, my friend, you've made a key flaw here. This idea that expansion of firms can't exist under, any hypothetical socialism. That, a democratically owned company cannot, grow is a little preposterous.
Okay, can you
push back on
explain to
it
me
quite a
how it
bit.
would? Can you explain to me on how it would? Because that
Yes.
would fuel my argument.
Yeah, you have 20 people at this location saying, "Hey, they need steel in Jonestown over the hill, right?" And you propose it, and there's a big company-wide vote. Like, should we expand into Jonestown? Yeah, all right, and then we do. It's really that simple, my friend.
How would you pay for that?
With the profits you generate from the company. Like, here's the thing, right? Everyone gets a fairly equitable share of excess money made from the company, that does not mean that the company does not keep a war chest for, standardized, costs of business and or expansions and potential maneuvering. Like that'd be insane for a company not to.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think there were two things. I think Dr. K, you can answer this first one quickly for me. When he was talking about
Oh, we lost him.
Oh, he fucking bit it. The CIA got him, boys.
Got
He
him.
was gonna come in hot for my points. Just FYI, I could feel it.
Okay. Well, I'm sure he'll be back soon. But okay. So, hey, we got Kobe here. Hey, Kobe. With your camera like super blurry. I don't know what's going on there, right? Calling from the void, right? Calling from the nightmare realm.
From the ring wraith dimension from Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Hey,
No, I love talking about
It actually kind of
globalism.
looks like that.
hey,
I love the globe. One of my favorite places.
Well, I'm a big fan of my man Kobe, and I'm always happy when he's around. So, Kobe, please tell me what your thoughts were.
I did write some stuff down. In the title of the stream, I need to turn my camera off for a second. I'm very sorry. I also fixed the blurriness when I turn by the time I turn it back on. But the kind of like title of the stream, globalism at its worst. I just kind of want to answer that question initially, and then I can go from there. I think globalism at its worst is because globalism, the biggest problem of globalism is that different nations have different, like, quote unquote, starting places. If we say that the starting place is like the post World War II economy, when most countries were like either destroyed or were near countries that were, the most like of the much of the industrialized world was destroyed. And I think that when you begin to try to say bring a country into like an EU, or there was that thing that there was a trade deal that got shot down with Hillary Clinton, during there was one thing she was proposing, the TPP I think it was called. One of the issues with this, which is really the nature of globalism, is you're bringing in a country that is going to be competing in a way, or that there's going to be an exchange made between America and let's say Atlantis exists in the middle of the country of the globe, and Atlantis was like destroyed during World War II, and they're fucked. And now we bring them into the NATO or whatever, and we bring them into the EU, and now they are having to compete in a way, and they're kind of having some of the value of their country, whether it's economic value or intellectual value or whatever, siphoned or sucked, whatever you want to say, to countries like Germany or to countries like France or to countries like, especially like America, which wasn't destroyed and was in a much better place comparatively. I think that really is like the ultimate cause of like a lot of the strife and a lot of the pushback. People feel like it's there's an unfair bargain, an unfair advantage. They feel like a lot of people feel like there are grudges and debts of the old world that are not like being paid over by the time we enter this new world. It was interesting. This kind of reminded me. There was a speech that went around on Twitter by the Kenyan ambassador to the UN. That was actually like a very beautiful speech where he talked about how African nations know more than any other nation what it's like to have borders imposed upon you, but that we have kind of decided as a national community or international community that we're not going to solve these disputes with like bayonets and cannonballs. We're going to solve these disputes with words. We're going to solve these disputes through diplomacy. We're not just going to conquer each other and take and rewrite our borders in the way that we want to see them. And on one hand, I think that's very beautiful, and I think that's why it got shared. But a lot of people disagreed with that, and I totally understand from an emotional perspective. I guess I understand that. Right? It is not fair. The American borders are not fair. The no border in Africa is fair, and many of the levels of unfairness are not the same. It's there are some there are countries that are half the country, like Egypt, like half the country is a fucking square because they were literally just drawn on a map. And I understand people's apprehension of the more these become solidified, the harder it becomes to deal with the wound. I get that, you know what I mean? So going on, I do think there are a lot of advantages, though. I think that as was being talked about here, I think globalization makes unionization actually easier. I think it makes it easier to cooperate with workers of other countries when you already have trade deals and economic deals and social connections with these countries. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's the only way that the workers are actually going to be able to kind of get a leg up is through not just working, not just like people within the same sector working together, but people within different countries working together. I think that when you look at countries that are not part of the sort of like, I guess you could say like things like the global Eastern, sort of like EU, NATO kind of shit, Japan, this kind of sphere of influence, I think that their unions do a lot worse. There are a lot of bad things that happen to union members in America, whether it's lawsuits, whether it's losing your job or whatever, but there are not like massacres of miners like there was in the 1920s anymore in America or anywhere in Europe or in Japan or anything like this. We have it in their history, but that's not, and luckily that's not something we deal with. We are, the baseline of what American workers and Korean, South Korean workers and Japanese workers and Canadian workers deal with is way better. And I think that we, as a collective community of workers, have a better foot to stand on to argue and for our perspective. But I want to talk a little bit more, because this is kind of where the conversation is going, about like the nature of capitalism. I kind of want to critique a little bit what was said. Capitalism, I think that we should. It seemed like there was kind of two contentions kind of being presented. Is capitalism that maximizes profits and sort of eschews the other social interests to the interests of the capitalist class? Is this crony capitalism, i.e. corrupt capitalism, or is this capitalism in its natural state? And I think that both of these are incorrect. Like with socialism, a lot of socialists talk about this idea that, well, socialism is going to be different. It's going to be socialism with Japanese characteristics and socialism with Cuban characteristics and socialism with Chinese characteristics. I think that that's absolutely true of capitalism. There are different countries. There are Islamic countries like Turkey that are fucking capitalist as fuck that also have Islamic values that are instilled in law that affect the way that they do economics. That's just the way, that's true for every single country in the world. And so I think that capitalism, I do not think that capitalism is sort of either of these poles. There are very few examples of completely unregulated capitalism or capitalism that is falls into like true oligarchy. And I think that a lot of those societies, when they exist, are very unstable. I think they fall a lot of the time. I think you see that with like a lot of the military dictatorships in South America. They did not have a lot of popular support, and they were able to. A lot of them are able to be overthrown. To address the idea of growth without profits, I think that we gotta address something. Socialism has nothing to do with whether or not you make a profit or not. It has to do with where the profit goes and what you do with the profit. So I would actually, yes, the fact there's no growth without profit. It's almost tautological, right? Like we need to make more houses to have more houses. If we have more babies, we need to have more houses. We need to have more PlayStations. We need to have more copper mines to make more PlayStations, right? Like that's almost tautological. But in capitalism or socialism are both actually extremely interested in profit. If anything, I could enter a third position here, a third critique, which would be the ecological perspective, which would say that both socialism and capitalism are inherently flawed because they're not necessarily concerned with whether or not we should be increasing growth, whether or not we should be having more copper mines, whether or not this is something that we should be encouraging, that is sort of an underlined assumption of both globalism and like traditional socialism and traditional capitalism, is that growth is good. We should have more stuff. People having a higher standard of living is good. Everybody should have Somalia should be white picket fences like America. That's whatever the equivalent is. That is sort of or whatever the socialism is. It should be the workers' paradise everywhere. The ecological perspective would say, well, hold on. Humans are not necessarily the ecological. The sort of the base assumption is that human beings have the same level of worth as other animals and other sort of sentient life, and that it is not fair for us to say that we can use up all the fucking lithium in the fucking universe and we can destroy whatever the habitat there because we want that. That's not something that would necessarily be okay, and that measures to say limit growth, limit, for example, something like the one-child policy, limit childbirth, limit consumption, limit wages and how much you can spend, these kind of things. That perspective would argue in favor of that. I think that adds an interesting perspective to look at, because I think that in the 21st century, an ecological perspective is going to be more and more important. Germany is one of the most important countries right now, and the current government alliance is called the Red, Green, or the Stoplight Coalition, because it's red for Social Democrat, red was it yellow for the Christian Democrats, and then green for the Greens. Green parties, ecological parties, are becoming extremely popular in a lot of countries, and many of these countries are advocating you should not be able to buy 2 cars. You should not be able to have a house this amount of size. You should not be able to take this amount of vacations. And these are values that really the socialist. When I was reading socialist texts, they dream about this. Those workers are going to take a vacation every year, and they will go to the People's Republic of Egypt, and they'll look at the things, and they'll grow their mind. That's like assumed in everything. That's the capitalism is you're going to take the mega train to Beijing. That's assumed in almost every 20th century ideology. I think that's going to be the big critique of the 21st century. Is what place do humans even have to make these consumptions, right?
So, okay, well, that was a lot. It was pretty wide-ranging. You're all over the place on that one. Let's Okay. Let's try to take a piece of that, Kobe. But like, it sounded like what you're at the end, what you're making was a degrowth argument. In fact, I had a conversation. I feel like on stream. I don't know. I have lots of conversations in lots of places. On degrowth, like not too long ago, talking about how maybe we have to create some sort of society where like actually I use exactly that example that you can only have one car, you know, that like per family or something, that like we'll have to do that if we want to create a more equitable world, but that equitable world by necessity may not look anything like the world that we are in now, right? The trajectory that we're in terms of like taking more resources, right? I think the genesis of this conversation was like, you know, talking about like electric cars and how like they are so environmentally destructive at this point, you know. They're working on making them better, but like the actual manufacturing process for them, not the driving process, but the manufacturing process is very like, ecologically destructive. And it's like if you actually like removed enough lithium and the other ingredients from the ground to like replace all the cars in America, right? It would be a huge fucking disaster. And like, does socialism have an answer to that? Not necessarily, right? But the answer maybe just be degrowth, that maybe we just all can't have as much stuff. And globalism, tying it back, because someone had to, globalism promises us more stuff cheaper, right? Like, don't worry about the damage done to workers, right? Don't worry about the financialization of like all these services, right? Like financial holdings of companies, right, from across the ocean, right? And how these things are run, how they interact with our economy. Don't worry about any of that. You'll get more stuff. So I think like with a degrowth model, like we won't we necessarily have to reject that globalism. I hope that makes sense.
You're not ever gonna be able to sell that to people that do freedom, that talk about freedom. That'll never work. I understand
limiting freedoms to maximize overall freedom. It's like, you know, that classic talking point.
Oh my god.
What? Can I hear Dr. K? Because he's over here seething.
She.
Gentlemen, I've said this before. I'm okay with any pronouns. You really don't need to correct someone. It's very polite, but you don't need to.
Sorry, my bad.
It's really fine. Yeah, Kobe, you give me the most delightful CBT, and if I had the love of Prime the way you do, I too would take 30 minutes to say a lot of like liberalism the kind of arguments. No. So Kobe, one, the idea that globalism is a net good for union is tacitly very untrue. Generally, the smaller a firm is, the easier time you have holding them accountable. If a firm, the CEO of a firm and the managerial class of a firm have the resources to take a flight anywhere in the world, anytime they want, to meet with whoever they want, and to keep these things organized. Workers and trying to keep a coherent unionized effort transnationally do not have this luxury. So they just like, there's repeated examples of this not being true. Hell, there's longshoremen here in California, right? They're trying to work with longshoremen in Mexico, and even that's difficult due to language barrier gaps, due to the fact that we don't have the funding to, be meeting with them on the regular basis, to study, the labor laws that they're facing, and vice versa. And the fact is that, the corporations that do the shipping do have the resources to do that because they've already pre-accrued that via their businesses, and so they have a tacit advantage when it comes to globalism. There's a very common saying amongst left-wing people where it's there's no borders for profits, but plenty of them for workers, something along those lines, right? Yeah, it's free movement of capital, but not for workers, right? And as long as that is sort of the case, no, globalism does in fact put its finger on the scale of capital. In addition, yes, of course, socialism is on this sort of environmentalist alliance. Literally, we described the red, yellow, green alliance. Like, those socialists are fucking teamed up with they work with the Greens for a reason. They are fairly closely aligned in their values and goals. So yeah, socialists do of course have an answer to the rising environmental crisis, and it's usually quite in line with what Greens are saying. Those are the 2 points of Kobe's that I can remember.
There were a lot, to be fair.
Yeah, it was a lot of rambling. It's fair, I do it too sometimes.
Not all the time. Kobe, if you want to respond.
Yes, I think this is like this is where it gets interesting, right? The typical red-green alliance, the watermelon alliance, as we can call it, of socialists and Greens, because typically socialists are typically socially progressive, and so are typically Greens, and they typically also agree on like freedom of speech stuff. A lot of times Greens will like support like eco-terrorism shit, and so they have to like there be typically behind this. In a lot of countries, crack down on union talk and shit. So there's a lot of free speech support and like. The problem is I was trying to point out is the economic stuff. The Democratic Party, the SDU in Germany is, I believe, and I'm sure Chinchilla will correct me in chat if I'm wrong, is more so supporting of nuclear, while the Greens are vehemently against nuclear. I think that any of the kind of degrowth stuff is something that I do not think any social democratic party would support. But perhaps.
So I work with groups like this here in the U.S. I can actually directly address this concern. I was in a meeting like almost to a T this conversation not 2 days ago, right? And essentially, it in socialist circles and in union circles, it generally breaks down like this: is generally the majority is going to be on that sort of green ideological bent, and then the kind that are sort of not on that bent tend to be a minority. Specifically in the conversations here in Los Angeles, we have an enormous port. It's an enormous producer of greenhouse gas, and there is a concerted effort by unions to sort of assist in the greening of it, and it's very interesting. You will have unions that are generally like more incrementalist, or there's very few that are flat out against it. But there are many that take a far more incrementalist approach, and there'll be the unions you expect. Unions for oil workers, for truckers, things like that. But for example, electrical unions, those are aggressively on board with greening projects, right? And so, yeah, of course you're going to get, the occasional people who are going to sort of hit the brakes in socialist circles, but it tends not to be, any opposition to profits that they're making from their companies. It's more that they are they have an economic anxiety, and it's more just like you need to address that, to ensure that as you're greening, you don't throw a group of workers out on their ass. But
that's the problem. Degrowth literally
usually
requires
Reds fall in right on board.
No, that's a problem though. That degrowth literally requires just throwing people on their ass. That like literally is a big part of this, right? Like the issue with I think you're running into it. I think you're talking about the relationship between unions and like green capitalists, people that want to start wind farms and shit. I'm talking about people that think that we need to not have the need to have as many wind farms, and then we need to have not the need to have as many X, Y, and Z, right? Like that is the perspective that I think has become much more popular. That I think is incompatible with a traditional, especially a unionist perspective. You're never the degrowth people are never going to convince a union to become unemployed.
Yeah, no, it's a tough sell. But there genuinely are like people who are on board with it. I was speaking with a member of an oil workers union the other day, and he was essentially saying this is that Chevron understands that oil is going to eventually hit the way of the dinosaurs that they're composed of, right? It's a business model that's going to become antiquated eventually, and so Yeah. You know what I mean, though, dude.
Sorry, B
And so
man.
essentially, the oil workers are saying, right, is, hey, Mr. Company Man, we understand that you're transitioning to a new business model to sort of do, you know, I think it was into natural gas, and they were like, we of the union want a say in where this is going, and we want a say in what this sort of energy we're transitioning to producing to is. And there was this sort of tacit refusal to cooperate and work with these unions. And so generally the obstructionist is far more on the corporate side. That said, when you're talking about like degrowth in general, yeah, if there is a strong welfare state to catch workers as they sort of fall out into antiquated roles, I would say people would be more on board with that. It's the fact that, you know, we have a nation state that just does not prioritize that in the slightest.
Okay. Yeah, I want to open this up. Hey, buddy, so Dre, you gotta, like, whatever you're doing for your camera, like, it's constantly, this is really distracting, like, super distracting. Every time you're, like, doing whatever, this is why you need to get a permanent setup. It's, like, just super distracting that you're constantly moving your camera around. So, like, do something about that, please. Okay, so I want to make sure other people can jump in. Kobe, if you have a response, I'll let you do that. But I do want to get other people in on this conversation. And we don't have to go down this particular route, but just I want to expand it. So Kobe,
Yeah, I'm sorry. The war has put me in a glub mood. I'm a bit dissatisfied with the world order, if I do say so myself. I was just saying, one of the problems, again, going back to the Greek degrowth, sort of steel manning the degrowth perspective. What happens when you become a little welfare state person? You become a little consumer. That's what you become a little consumer. A lot of people started becoming on welfare when what's it called? COVID hit, and you start ordering out, you start buying shit. That's fine. I'm not hitting on people, right? If you're stuck at home all day, if you don't do that. But I'm not going to assume that people are going to become volunteer people that are heading down to going down to the local old folks home. If this happened and tons of people got out of work because we were degrowthing our economy, the problem is that they would just want to do things that would require us to grow our economy. But I want to open up to other people.
I guess I'm
go
just
ahead.
fucking confused where we're at as far as like conversation now. We're not on. Are we on degrowth or?
Yeah, it's like degrowth. Like, well, is degrowth? Okay. Do you think degrowth is incompatible with globalism, or yes or no?
Oh, I would have to say
degrowth.
No, I would have to say that I would look at the idea of degrowth as a very defeatist kind of belief, as far as what I would envision the human species, what we typically kind of aim for. It is more and more and more, but with that idea of like more and more and more, you also want to get more and more expansionist, right? So, and again, if we're going to talk about degrowth, I would have to say that I would rather talk about expansionist, so I would have to bring up like colonizing Mars, right? So like, it's not just like, hey, we need to go back to kind of like tribal life and tribal living. While I will agree that has a lot of great possibilities, especially health-wise, when I picture what degrowth kind of is.
You're picturing something fake.
Oh, okay. Sorry, but like, as far as the idea that in which I picture like addressing somebody from what I think you guys are explaining degrowth is, and again, this is a concept that is semi-foreign to me that I'm slightly aware of, feels a little defeatist in the idea of like, it's not just about like this one plan is what we're supposed to have, right? It's more about the idea of like where we can go, and while we're here learning on how to get there, that would be the point of why we seem to be so expansionist. But again, like, I would agree as far as like managing resources has to be done better, but we only seem to do that at times where we're going to really be dicked down in ways that we don't want to be.
Yeah, so I agree. I think we should.
I think
we should build a base on the moon, just because that would be cool. I don't know. I feel like we gotta do that just because I feel like that just like just do that just so we can like in civilization we can just get into the new era. Like, it's just a thing, just like a newest landmark.
Yeah.
I mean, humanity needs a W, and that'd be a fat W, right? You have a cool picture different countries of the world, it'd be good, right? But
Right.
here's the problem, though. It all comes back. I mean, I guess I could explain the degrowth a little more. Like, you gotta rip the part of the earth to do that, and there's only so much earth, and there's only so much of these,
Oh,
these
yeah.
minerals, and they're only gonna. It's gonna take hundreds of millions of years for them, for more of them to come out. Degrowth is the idea that every country on Earth is currently operating under the idea that basically they're going to keep having babies and keep having people, and each of those kids are going to have a higher standard of living than their parent, or they're going to be, or at very least, it will maintain for everybody. So we will have that's basically, even if you, unless you're like a psycho Nazi or something like this, that's like everybody wants that. I want everybody to be happy and healthy. We want people living in the Middle East to have the same standard of living, healthcare, blah blah blah, as people in the West. And we all have different ideas of how we're going to get there, but that's like everybody. The idea of growth is that is just incompatible with the resources we have on the earth. That that things are going to have to give.
I think that.
Go for it. Yeah, no, go. If you have a response, go for it. I've been talking forever.
Yeah, I think that not that we need to exploit more resources, but I think the redistribution of those resources don't align with what you're saying, or like the implementation of that. So I think that there's plenty of earth and plenty of space resources to supply the whole human population, and then some. I think what the problem is like greed and the need for more and more and more. Now, there's an argument, like you were saying, on how we were going to achieve that, but I don't think that there's not enough around, or not enough resources for everybody to enjoy the same amount of the same basic living experience. I'm not on par with that.
But here's the issue, though, is that we've seen the biggest expansion in what the minimum living experience, living whatever is in the universe, right? When I was a kid, most of Asia was like huts. It was like Vietnam in like the 1970s in my mind, right? It was nothing, right? But now, like there are I think over 20 cities in China with more than 20 million people. Like that, the standard of living is way higher, right? Like people, like I think we can agree, like most people in most places should probably have like access to the internet, phones, tablets. Probably able to have like whatever access to like transportation means in that country, whether that means a bus pass if you live in the Netherlands, or that means a car if you live in America. Probably means like access to a higher university education. Probably means like a standard of we're not going to be hyper exploiting people. But the problem is, I would contend that especially if we go with the idea that we're expanding, and that it's probably going to be when I die, the standard of living is going to be a lot higher, and there's going to be a lot of technology that requires a lot even more of scarce resources. I become more skeptical of that argument that we have enough for everybody, and I want there to be enough for everybody. And I agree with you. I would even agree that right now we waste an unfathomable amount of shit.
And so I.
No, continue. Sorry, no, Trey, please.
So in the aspect of the standard of living and maintaining that over the population that's projected to grow at the rate that it's growing is something where we can take science and be able to find renewables and find these the resources to be able to supply or support that growth in a sustainable way. And I'm not an environmentalist or anybody that's on the boards of these companies looking for these things, but if we're heading in that direction to be able to find ways to support people that isn't fueling them based off of fossil fuels and off of renewables or other sources of energy, then I think the base standards of living are almost infinite in regards, not infinite, but finite to the space that is habitable by humans, and that's the direction that we should go to.
Damn.
I think it's important at this point to point out that there's more out there than just Earth, right? I'm not talking like Mars colonization, but there are serious attempts, serious work and research being done towards like figuring out how you go about mining asteroids, for example, right? Because then you can get some of these raw materials that we desperately need, especially some things that we're running out of, like helium, damaging the ecosystem here on Earth. And if we can find a way to combine that sort of stuff alongside renewable and environmentally friendly energy, I'm not going to say like limitless potential. I'm not going to give a pipe dream, but like that would help a lot, right?
Yeah, it would. My problem with that thinking, and like first of all, I'm a person who is big into space travel. I want far more investment into that field, right? Like I want to be able to I want our nation to be leading that, at least, well, my nation. You're Canada, you know, so whatever, right? You can hop on our spaceships.
You can be our hat.
Yeah, you can be. We'll tow you.
Well,
we'll tow
we
you
have
up.
the arm, right? We had the arm.
But in any case, yeah. But the point is we like having that sort of mindset that like, well, like let's look to those technologies that aren't here yet and like may not get here, right? In any reasonable amount of time, if ever. Like I feel like to Kobe's point, we need to be planning for like the technologies that we have now and that are maybe will emerge in the foreseeable future, right? So bringing it back for a moment to electric cars, right? There's like they're trying to create lithium batteries that are like less destructive and less environmentally detrimental to create, right? That they're working on that stuff, right? So that's something that's in the near future. That's something that we can expect and look forward to. But beyond that, beyond those near-term goals, I just don't see how like we talk about, yeah, well, let's go mine asteroids. Maybe, well, hopefully one day, but we can't like plan around that, right?
I mean, bring it back to current events.
Well, we can't.
Go ahead, Kate. Go ahead.
Well, let me just.
Okay, Dave first.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we actually can plan around that, right? Because like, it took less than a decade to get from JFK saying to do it to the moon. If I remember correctly, that was less than a decade, and we actually already have a lot of the technologies we need for something like asteroid mining. Like we have landers on.
We have Bruce
asteroids.
Willis. Sorry, that was the reference. Okay, I apologize. Go ahead.
Right. So yeah. So like look, I don't want to hype up NASA too much, but like those guys really know how to do a hell of a lot with a very small budget.
But you can't.
And I think that.
But you're okay. So, but like we didn't. So I hear you. You're saying that, you know, President was it Kennedy said do it, and then we did it, right? But we didn't design public policy around that, right? Like it wasn't expected that we would actually accomplish it in that amount of time. I don't think most people thought like we would actually really fail. It's like, okay, you could save this thing. You know, like you can make this goal. Oh, I'm gonna fail. But we didn't. We actually did it. So great, right? And again, I'm not against the investment. So I'm definitely I love the investment in space travel. I think that will earn us dividends eventually. But the planned public policy of, hey, we are going to launch either manned spaceships or unmanned spaceships, and maybe they will go to the asteroid belt and get materials there, or maybe tow an asteroid here and put it like in orbit or something like that. I would love for it, but like, how do you plan like a nation around that?
Especially when the number one goal of humanity right now has to be to transfer humanity, both the developed world and the developing world, off of fossil fuels. While about most of society is either built on fossil fuels or is currently building a society on fossil fuels. Right. Like, I think one of the issues here is all of us are kind of assuming, oh yeah, we'll get out of this 60 or 50 years in the future. We're going to be fucking on that fucking asteroid. But like 60 or 50 years in the future, you know, we may be liberating the France from from a political organization that none of us could even imagine from now.
Well, and then here, let me kind of like ground our space ideas as far as like advancing. There's something called the Goldilocks Zone, which is like inhabitable planets. There's about 1,780 confirmed beyond our solar system. As many as 6K, only 16 of those are located in the star's habitable zone. So as of right now, what we know, like the best we could plan for is like we got 16 other fucking planets to go to. Like this idea of infinite expansion becomes very fucking small. Now, the advancements of technology, we cannot deny it's been incredibly quick and fast in our lifetime. But if we just base our conversation off this, we still only have 16 planets, other planets to go to, just to ground it a little bit. So the idea that
yeah, I wasn't trying to talk about like leaving the solar system. That's like centuries away. If it'll ever happen.
Yeah, of course.
All I'm trying to say is like our biggest issue is energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not going to get solved by asteroids.
Well, yeah, sure.
But like in terms of like raw material that we're kind of like, I don't know exactly, but we're probably reaching like the maximum rate at which we can extract these materials from the earth, and it's becoming foreseeable that we're going to run out of some of these materials. In that case, did we lose someone?
Yeah,
we did.
Keep going.
In that case, I think that we need to start looking away from the earth, and like I don't really think it would take as long as you might expect to achieve like something like that, right?
I fucking hope not. I mean, I think we all do fucking hope not, but
I think it's quite glib that is the. I mean, like I agree with you. I don't disagree. I think it's something we should do, but I think it's quite glib that humanity is like invent our way out of it, find an asteroid with enough stuff to build our way out of it. We're like we are looking, we're thinking, right? We have the whiteboard up, right?
I mean, when you get presented a problem as such, like you can only do so much, right? Yeah, I don't think Kay is like off on anything.
No, if not. I'm not even disagreeing with you.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is. But.
Like, yeah, I mean, if we had more access to resources, but I don't know. I feel like even then, so like you said, energy is a problem, but it's also like consumption. It's also like how do we dispose of the things that we get? Like, so if we had some pool of resources that we could draw from, right? And we could Kobe can hear you typing. Don't worry. So a pool of resources, right? And then this pool of resources that we could draw from and make stuff with it, right? Well, then what would happen to that stuff? It would end up in the great garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean, right? That's what we would do with it. If we had like an endless supply of plastic wrappers, right? Like forget about the environmental impact of making it, right? But just like you had plastic wrappers, and we could like shrink wrap the world, right? Like all of that would end up in the great Pacific garbage patch. Like that's another problem. And so I think to Kobe's point once again, right? Shout out to my man Kobe, is that we would it would have to have a way of limiting this, right? Limiting either our consumption, right? Probably starting with that, or like completely changing the way that we recycle these, or like our waste management system. Basically, that's what I'm going for. Our waste management systems, like that has to like change in a way that maybe we can't even imagine at this point. If we had infinite material, so back to the asteroid thing, like it's not enough. Though again, I'm not pushing back against it. It's just like I don't see. Yeah.
I mean,
I'm not trying to offer like a miracle solution. It's just one. It's just like talking towards the whole like issue of like, running out of raw materials on Earth. That was all I was saying, is just that there's raw materials elsewhere other than Earth, and we even if we don't have the technology today to extract those materials, we have like the plans and It's mostly at this point like engineering and funding, right? So
How much lithium are we gonna have, though?
Hmm?
All the lithium farming.
I mean, we have enough. Like this idea. I
Not
guess
really.
I would push back. I would
A lot of
push.
people like, bro.
Yeah, I guess I would push back on this. That did get brought up earlier. That I think is a little bit different. This idea that lithium is incredibly, very, very environmentally toxic, in comparison to what we have available as of right now, like Valvoline oil, for whatever reason, just popped up into my head. It's definitely a hell of a lot easier to kind of deal with, recycle. As far as like the destruction of the environment, companies that are mining this product, what ends up happening is they re-put the dirt in that was there before. So the idea that this is very destructive, while we still need, and again, we're talking about how we manage our resources, we still need a lot of different problems and issues in place on how we do this. But if we can get battery technology into a solid state drive kind of position, it gets a hell of a lot easier from that, and that's been the real kind of big push lately as far as dealing with electric vehicles. So we seem to be pretty good at this idea of like figuring our way out of a problem, as long as we don't fuck ourselves over too much.
Well, here one of the issues though is that
Mhm.
I just confirming myself. We're confirming this. 58% of the world's lithium is in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the problems is
Oh,
that
boy.
there's like a term that always gets brought up in like the Tiberius always brings up. It's called like the curse of, or the resource curse or whatever, which is like this
Yeah.
like typical Reddit atheist thing where it's like but it makes sense, right? It's like if you have
Yeah.
like a resource, everyone else is going to want it, and so they're going to
Of
influence
course.
your country like
Right.
fucking crazy, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I wanted
Especially if it's in South America.
just to just to play little civilization, playing civilization
Right,
with humanity. I can imagine a lot of very interesting situations. Bolivia, I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe this is true. Bolivia, at least in America, this is true. Bolivia is the most indigenous country on Earth by population. 80% of Bolivians' population is identifies as indigenous people, and there is extreme disagreement and problems with even the very popular
They won
socialist
a
government
court case
in the
a
country.
couple years
With-
back.
yeah.
Okay,
But there's
yeah.
a lot of disagreement in that country, even with the very popular president. That basically the most unpopular thing about him is his selling out the country, not in my words, the words of many people in the country, to lithium companies because they want the fucking lithium. Right? It sucks. It's kind of it's better for the environment, but it almost quadruples one of the other problems,
Prime,
which is the
Right.
problem
Your,
of
Yeah.
oil, which is
your
like
mic is like fuzzy. There's like a ton of.
Yeah, there we go. I was wondering if it was Prime.
I was
Uh,
I was keeping myself muted,
Sorry,
but
okay.
I'll do.
But
Yeah,
it's
no.
kind of interesting the fortune that humanity has in this case, which is that
Yeah.
we trade oil is very, very. It's kind of like spread out. There's lots of different countries that have oil, but the
Right.
oil is extremely fucking horrible to get out of the ground, right? However, lithium, less environmentally bad. We can do a lot better with it, but it's in like 4 countries, and those countries are already like hella colonized, and are probably going to get fucked over like
Yeah,
triple,
right.
quadruple. Even.
we do have a very, very large lithium deposit in the States. I think it's in Nevada. So like, fuck,
Yeah,
I
but
can't disagree with you.
it's
I
in
can't
Native
disagree
American lands, though.
No, it's in
Alright, but-
Nevada.
It's in Native American lands.
Yeah,
No,
it's-
most of Nevada is owned by the U.S. government.
I
not
well,
Native
yeah, of
American.
course, all of it's owned by the U.S. government. Yeah.
No, I mean like most of this, at least the deposit I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't believe it's on Native American land. Although, and again, this has been I think we talked about this the other day as far as like how we deal with natives. This is a great improvement on how we can kind of go in hand with those sovereign countries and helping them build their economies and helping Native Americans not be in the shitholes that we fucking put them in
Speaking of I'm just imagining like a sort of alternate history scenario. Imagine like 50 or 60 years from now, we rewrite some of the laws with some of the native tribes, and let's say that we like some of that lithium is on Navajo land, and now Navajo is like this little Saudi Arabia in America. There's
Yeah,
like
no
influence
shit. Like
politics
that
all around
would be
America,
the
and
idea. That would honestly, you would fucking have to. Like, you don't have a choice in this modern day and age.
No,
Like,
that wouldn't happen because America would just take the land over. They would not give the money.
You would just take it.
Be in a
What the fuck? Just take that.
Now, again, this is maybe me being a little bit more personal and having a little more faith in humanity and our changing American government as of right now. I don't think so. I would push back on that.
What was about what about our government has changed? But hold on. Kobe, my man Kobe was talking about the resource curse, right? Well, the resource curse works that, like, you have other nations and individuals in nations who are focused on themselves and no one else, and have no problem invading or knocking over governments or whatever, right, for their own benefit. See, Doobie's one of those people right there, right? Doobie would absolutely, Doobie would absolutely 100%, right? He doesn't give a shit where those resources are from. He'll send them American military in there. Why don't you, Doobie?
Yeah, of course.
Savage,
his focus is on America. He's made it very clear. Doobie, yeah, we were talking. Well, we've sort of gotten on the resource curse. We were talking about globalization in general, and whether it's a good or a bad thing. And sorry, what is your position on this? Actually, I don't remember. Because, like, are you more of a protectionist, like I am, when it comes to American industries, or are you? I don't know.
I guess you could classify me as a protectionist. I'm very like against anything that would hurt American workers, right? But that being said, I think that given that we live in like in a global world, if that makes any fucking sense, you know what I mean? Given that we are globalized, right? And there is a lot of trade between countries. I think we're at a point where you just kind of need to do it, right? You need to interact with people. You need to do it. If it's cheaper to do something in one area, you kind of got to send the labor there. So I think it makes more sense to like, I don't want to sound like a crazy person. My preference would be that we shift American foreign policy and push really heavily like toward like annexation, peaceful annexation of other nations, where it makes sense, and bring them into the American fold. Like that'd be my goal. Like we can start with Canada and Mexico, and move down from there.
Buy Greenland.
Oh,
Sure.
I kind of
You can't be bothered with trade deals. You just got to annex.
I think it makes more sense for everybody. Like why compete against each other when it just work together?